Good evening, everyone. Welcome to attend today's event, the second of the International Professionals Program. I'm Sean Yan. I'm the co-chair of the International Practice Committee. We are a group of architects who are aiming to become the hub for all the international traffic in the world of architecture design. So as an international architect, I'm certain that we are very talented and very hardworking. However, I always notice our local colleagues seeing us having mysterious conversations that they have no idea about. That is us having communications in order to find out how to sustain our working visa only to be able to work legally. And we do it because it is so complicated. Luckily, today's event is all about building comprehensive knowledge on how to adapt ourselves to this new country and how to take best advantage of our international background. So for more exciting future events like this, please be sure to follow us on social media at AIA-SFIPC. And before I begin, I would like to say thank you to all our sustaining sponsors for our chapter and our committee sponsor who has been supporting us to put together all our international programs. And last but not the least, I would like to say thank you to all our speakers and all people who has been helping us to organize today's event. And also say thank you to Elizabeth Spurrier from Seoul Arc, who has been helping us planning this event. She's not able to attend, unfortunately. And of course, thank you to all of you, our registered attendees. So without any of the mentioned, we are never able to have such a wonderful event. So before I begin, I would also like to introduce you to today's moderator, Marian Miri, AIA from DLR Group. Marian is an architect with international background herself. She has a broad experience designing high-rise towers, large-scale residential, and mixed-use projects in Asia, Oceania, and North America. Her global view towards solving every puzzle offered her a unique perspective, leading countless projects to its final success. So now, let me hand over the mic to Marian. Hi, Marian.
Hi, Sean, and thank you. And hello, everyone. We are excited to have you here. As Sean said, I'm an architect with DLR Group here in San Francisco. And like many of you, I moved to San Francisco 3 years ago. And I found it very difficult as an expat to navigate through the requirements. So I decided to reestablish this international practice committee at AIA San Francisco. And one of our mission is to help international architects to join the US market and navigate through many daily obstacles. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers, Hannah Brown from Brown Creative Consulting, Lori Drayer from Taylor Design, and Jonathan Groth from Green Spiegel. I let the speakers to say a few words about themselves, and I will start with Hannah.
Hi, good evening. Hi, I'm Hannah Brown, and as mentioned, I run a firm called Brown Creative Consulting. I'm actually trained as an architect and got my master's in architecture at Berkeley, but was one who went far astray from design and ended up in marketing and financial management and operations for various small firms. And that's what my practice focus is that I help small architecture, landscape architecture, and interior design firms, usually the firms are less than 35 individuals, navigate the world of HR and also dabble in financial operations. And since payroll is usually our largest expense, I find it very much the complementary. And I'm happy to be here today. I find this topic is like extremely timely, given the number of graduates that are coming out of our schools from international origins, and then also because we are in the middle of what's being called the Great Recession and everybody is hiring like mad. So it's a good time to have this talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Good evening. My name's Lori Drayer. I work for Taylor Design. We're about a 100-person firm, so not that big. But the reason I was invited is I've been the VP of HR or HR principal in some pretty large firms, kind of a global perspective. Gensler, back in the day, Anshin and Allen, which got bought by Stantec, but I spent a lot of time moving people into the US and actually out of the US. So kind of an interesting global perspective. And I've been fortunate to work for firms who were very progressive and wanted a broad, diverse view of design, the world, perspectives, educational perspectives. So kind of how we manage that, some of the outcomes of that. And I agree with Hannah, the Great Resignation is a great time for people to be considering talent everywhere on the planet. So I will share some perspectives for you, maybe some tips and tricks, and I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan. And I also need to say, Hannah, go Bears. I'm also a Cal grad. Jonathan.
Hi, thanks, Lori. My name is Jonathan Grote. I'm the managing partner of Green and Spiegel. We're an immigration law firm that has offices throughout the United States and Canada. And we work primarily within the business immigration sphere. So people getting visas and green cards and scoping out expansion if they want to open a new office in the United States from overseas. I have a particular affinity for architects. I work with a lot of architects. Little secret is like when I am looking to relax, I actually find myself watching documentaries on modern design of residential homes. So I have a little bit of a personal passion for it. I will spare you the details of my roof deck, but I did design it myself, just not using CAD or any of your fancy techniques. It was the back of a napkin. So as I hope to educate you guys on some of the current trends in immigration, do know that I have a deep respect and admiration for what you guys all do. And immigration is really one of those things that should facilitate what you do. And what I always tell people, the key with immigration is don't live your life for a visa. Allow the visa to fit into what you're trying to do with your life. And that's really an important perspective to have. And hopefully we'll unpack that a little bit tonight. I did want to just say one thing to everybody is immigration is very general. And the information you're going to hear today is not specific legal guidance, and it shouldn't be taken as legal guidance. That's a little lawyerly disclaimer. But as you know, as one of the things I like to do when I give presentations, if you have an individual situation that you would like to discuss, my firm is happy to offer you a free consultation. We can talk about where you are individually, give you a little bit of a roadmap. So don't feel if your exact question is not answered today, that doesn't mean that we aren't able to answer it. It's just that we're trying to keep this pretty broad. So with that, I'll hand that back over to Miriam. And thank you so much for having me tonight.
Of course. Thank you so much, Owen. And Jonathan, I'm going to start the conversation with you. I think it's a good time for you to just give us a general update on current visa regulations and practices, perhaps.
Yeah, so it's been a rough go on the immigration front for the last 5 years. You know, the Trump administration really came in and they used immigration as sort of a lightning rod for the populist movement. They really had this concept of Americans first, American jobs. That was the rhetoric that they would say. In a lot of ways, and you know, some of my colleagues remember this, but it was eerily reminiscent to the language that the Democrats used in the 70s and 80s, where it was like this union sort of protect the jobs of US workers kind of perspective. It was very interesting because Republicans tended to be more pro-commerce, to see such a diametric change in the rhetoric that was coming out of the political party. But I think all of us can agree, and I'm a registered independent for the record, but I think all of us can agree that the way the Trump administration thought about immigration was very strict. And that's going to be the nice way of saying it. And as a result, and this is what's really interesting about it, Miriam, the laws did not change all that much, but the policies changed dramatically. And one of the ones that caused people a lot of problems was this concept of de novo review. And what that meant was every time you filed a petition, it was as if it was the first time immigration ever encountered you. So even if you were an Indian national that was going for their 4th extension of an H-1B, they would treat it as if it was your first one. And we started seeing very I want to say, strict adjudication trends. And what we witnessed was a denial rate under the Obama administration of around 7% for your primary filings, go all the way up to 30%. And it created a lot of fear and concern among the immigrant population, especially, it was making people reluctant to change jobs. It was making people reluctant to push the boundaries on taking promotions in some instances for fear of what would happen when they were filing an extension. Now, what's interesting about the Biden administration is that they took away that de novo review and they replaced it with something called prior deference. So essentially, if a previous officer had approved you for that classification, the next officer is to rely on that decision. So it sort of created this return to predictability, which was really, really missing. So if you're changing jobs from one firm to another, and this goes with what Lori and Hannah are saying about a lot of people moving jobs, foreign nationals should feel far more secure doing so than they did under the previous administration. And the adjudication trends reflect that. Approval rates are way up under this administration for H-1Bs, your primary working visa classification. So I know we're going to talk a little bit later about the pandemic and the effects on visa processing, but just in terms of policy, immigration has gotten friendlier. Where it has become problematic is that there was a lot of officers that were hired under the Trump administration and trained under the Trump administration. So the adjudications still have a bit of a haphazard feel to them. Sometimes you file one thing and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be so easy. This person's eminently qualified, and it comes back with a request for evidence. Other times, you'll file something that you think is borderline and it will come back approved. And the most hyperbolic example I can give of this is actually I was doing a visa for an Australian. They have a special visa called E3, and it was for an architect. And the government literally wrote back with a request for evidence and said, show us that this person's position requires a degree. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, I was so flabbergasted by this. And it was a premium case. So I actually called them up and I was like, sorry, this is a matter of quality control. Like, do you know what these people go through to become architects? Do you know how long the degree is like the smallest part of the process? And you're questioning whether or not a degree is related for the field. Fortunately, they overturned that decision without us having to actually respond to the request for evidence. But that shows you still today how problematic the adjudication trends are. So, look, from a policy perspective, it is getting better, but you can't undo 4 years of very strong anti-immigrant rhetoric overnight. It's going to take time, but it is trending in the right direction. We don't have the statistical analysis out for the approval rates for this year since, because the fiscal year for immigration just ended, but it is certainly, I can just feel it on the ground. It is a lot better. The other thing to really keep an eye on, and this is critical for those of you who are like thinking about green cards and might be from India or China in particular, because they have particularly long waits. The next couple of weeks are going to be very, very interesting. It's not getting a lot of press and you're not hearing about it, but there's a rider on immigration law changes that is attached to the federal appropriations bill, this big spending bill on infrastructure. And if that passes and the immigration stuff is included, not only is it going to provide a pathway to status for the DACA, the kids that came here without status as youth, but it's going to eliminate per country quotas for green cards. So Miriam, if you're from India and somebody was to start a green card process for you now, do you know how long it would take you to get your green card with the people in the queue?
No idea.
65 years, 65, which is ridiculous. And obviously it's not going to take that long, but that's how they predict it based on the amount of people that are in place. This bill will eliminate the quotas per country. It will recapture all the unused green cards from 1991 to the present, and derivative family members won't take numbers. So this jockeying of waiting for green cards should disappear. But whether or not it actually sneaks into this large bill is yet to be decided. So, in terms of where we are on policy, where we're going, We see a lot of good stuff trending in terms of adjudication, which is sort of the law of the everyday. And there's a little glimmer of hope for a better future. So, check back in with me sort of like December 8th when the deadline on the budget kick is happening, and we'll see what happens. I'm hopeful that people will come to their senses. It's very common sense stuff, but it is something to keep a close eye on.
Very positive, Jonathan. I was actually wondering, are we going to go down, or are you going to like bring up our mood?
Wait until
But that was a good start.
wait until I tell you about the results of the pandemic later.
Okay, before we lose this good mood, I want to hand it to Lori and ask her about basically like walk us through the role of expat practitioners in shaping the future of architecture, and give us some insight into policies of large firms when it comes to hiring international talents.
Well, as I mentioned, I've had the benefit of working for some very large, progressive global firms who saw immigration as a part of practice, and tax and moving all interrelated. So Gensler started out, I was with Gensler back when it was only 300 people. So we were already doing H-1Bs. That was back in the 90s. We were totally open to it back then. Well, you had an F visa, which is now the OPT, but I won't bore you with the history of that. But anyway, we were going out to colleges and meeting people, and there was already a large percentage of people coming out of architecture programs, accredited ones in the US, that were from some other place. Great portfolios, really interesting people. So we had the attitude, these are great people, we want to hire them. So we had ourselves set up for that. And the great thing that happened over the 10 years I was there was that people who came in probably got an education in the US almost exclusively. That was how we did it at Gensler. Then became part of the fabric of the firm, and quite often went back to their country of origin. And that is, in fact, how Gensler became global. They had the connections to the firm and how things happen. And I can go to a number of major capitals around the world now and find people I worked with. I did their first H-1B, and they're now running that Gensler global office. So it had this great impact on us. Great amount of talent. And just from a practitioner's point of design diversity, getting people from different places is always awesome. We know for a fact that diverse groups always outperform, always, always, always. It's like the sky is blue and diverse groups of designers always outperform. So this is kind of a known thing, and you need to decide this is part of your values as a company or not. On the math side, we would pay for everything and say, we had a payback clause though. So we would pay right up front because people didn't have the money to pay for visas. And I don't think they do anymore. Some of those laws have changed. Now employers have to pay more, but I've never met anybody who wasn't happy to hear that visas were sponsored. We actually had it on our application, not as a question, but as a comment. We sponsor work visas. And I still work in a company where we sponsor work visas. And if you put that out there, you start to attract an incredible amount of talent. So financially, this has happened over and over and over again. When we have a boom market of 2000 or 2007 or 2017, people are paying headhunters these ridiculous amounts of money. I mean, ridiculous amounts of money. And right now in the Great Resignation, people are starting to up the ante. I totally agree with this. Wages should be raised. I have no issue with that at all. But it's funny that you would pay a headhunter a ton of money and not look at sponsoring someone for a green card is going to cost a whole lot less. And you're going to have a totally committed and engaged employee who's grateful. The math works if you just change your mindset. And I've never worked at a company that didn't have an immigration attorney. I used to feel like I had a really good grasp on it, but things have changed so radically in the last 5 years. I'm scared to breathe that I'll do something wrong. So I've always worked with counsel to make sure we don't do anything to screw up. Company pays a small fine. Individual could pay a very large loss of the potential to fulfill their dream. I've also worked on both immigration and emigration. I've had people where we couldn't get them a green card. We moved them to another country where perhaps there was a different relationship with their home country of origin, because every country in the world has a unique relationship with every other country in the world. They'd get a great international experience. A lot of people became managers and directors, and then Jonathan can talk more about bringing people back in on an L visa, which is a whole lot easier. And people then became tri-nationals, that much more diverse, much more knowledgeable about cultural differences. But again, the math is there. You do need a lawyer or somebody really good like Hannah to help you with writing these things, because they're careful and detail oriented. But the cultural values are there, the design values are there, and the economics are there in terms of hiring people. That's kind of a broad view of the global experience, but again, they have a lot more resources, which is why I was thrilled through this adventure to meet Hannah, because we need more people who can do this and help people. Get out there and apply like crazy, because I think now is that moment where anybody could find a job right now, because it is that talent is that scarce out in the marketplace. I'm just saying, talent is scarce in the marketplace.
Thanks, Lori. That was really good. And Hannah, I'm going to extend the same question to you, but obviously from the small firm standpoint. As you know better than me, many candidates, in fact, prefer to start in a smaller firm, since they get the opportunity to work in various phases of the project much faster than some larger corporates. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I would say, first of all, that with many small firms, they have not encountered a visa situation before. Quite a few firms, like if you were to look at the small 5 and under person firms in the Bay Area, many of them are startups and have only been in existence for the past 5-10 years. And so they just haven't encountered the situation where they need to apply for a visa. So I often see my role working directly with principals of kind of unveiling and unmasking what that process will be looking like. But from the perspective of the candidate who's looking for a new position, I think one of the things I wish the schools did a little bit better is to kind of sell practitioners on how easy the OPT visa is to do. Because I mean, I've never used an attorney for an OPT visa. It's just the 2-page form and we're done, and we do an evaluation a couple of years later and a renewal after 1 year. And it's just almost too easy to performance evaluations are harder. And so I always explain that to my clients. And I think the other part of that is that usually if you're just coming right out of school, we don't expect that you're going to know what you're going to do in 5 years. So the OPT gives us a great opportunity to get to know how your work experience is and where you're going to fit in our firm and our culture. And then we get to discuss after 1 year or 2 year, okay, are we going for the H-1B lottery? Are you from a country where we have another visa opportunity? Are we looking at TN visas, which I've been doing quite a bit of right now? What's the situations? But we usually start that dialogue not in that first moment, but often after the person's been with us for a year. And at times then we have a little bit of time to begin the discussion about green cards. And I think what's been really eye-opening to me is the firms that have 5 individuals who are now willing to talk about green cards, when a few years ago they were like, no way, we can't afford the $12,000 in fees and other things that this might afford. And now it's like, well, yes, absolutely, we can afford that because it'll cost us 3 times as much to replace this person. So I think the appetite for hiring folks, and especially, I mean, it's very encouraging that the schools with the OPT visas are making it so much easier to get you started for the first 1, 2, 3 years. I do wish they sold it a little bit more to small firms, but and I think what you would have to know as a candidate is that it's probably important that you have a little bit of insight and can explain that during a job interview if it comes up. And if the employer is asking, do you require work sponsorship, that you can say, I do, but it's actually just this one piece of paperwork and my offer letter that is going to get me that first step.
And sorry to interrupt there, but one thing to just be a little bit mindful on that point is to take advantage of the 3 years you can get of OPT work. The employer has to be enrolled in that E-Verify program, which is this voluntary double check thing. Hannah, I don't know, I'd be curious, do you find most of the employers that you work with are willing to enroll in E-Verify?
I administer it. So most of them do not want to do it, but I do it for them. And it's not a big deal because since I handle all of the other hires as well, it's just, you know, I think, and I try to explain to the ones that I can't take on that this is going to be an hour of their life where they learn a lot about the I-9 form to get themselves signed up on E-Verify and do the tutorial. And then every time somebody's hired, it's a 5-minute process. It's not some big scary thing. I wish that that requirement would go away because I do think it's a small hurdle of enrolling in the E-Verify for a small firm, but I see it as my role to try to demystify that as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I always say is that for employers that hire professional employees, it can actually be a benefit because it can deflect liability in case you do accidentally have somebody working for you who may not have had status.
And more clients are requesting it and requiring it depending on the type of project that people go into. So it actually benefits you multiple ways to do it. And Hannah, I liked your description. It's less than a minute to fill it out. It's actually easier than doing the dang I-9 form. It's just boom, 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 you're done. And then everybody feels better. And also put it in your advertising. If somebody is worried about it, they will self-select out. So much, much easier than it used to be. That's why I was waving the piece of paper. I was trying to give you not only props, but real props, like seriously, 2 sheets of paper. And I love your comment about the schools. I've actually helped students go back to the school and say, bring me this paper. The school didn't even tell them. They just happened to know we would be open to OPT. So they came to us. The school did. We had to direct the school kind of, here's what you do. Another piece of paper. So great advice.
Exactly, Hannah, that was really awesome. And you've already started to kind of like touch base on the next question, which it is about how can we just implement some short-term tactics for personal growth and development of these international talents when they enter the market? How can they cut corners and go through some shortcuts? Because often they come with like years of experience. They're not all students. Some coming after like 20 years of experience around the world. And it's hard to start from scratch all the time. So any tip? I think I start with, I don't know, Hannah or Lori, whoever wants to go first.
Well, I would just say in terms of growth, and if you're looking for a job change, one of the most important things to me, reviewing multiple resumes per week, is that you've actually looked at my ad and answered the questions that I have, and you haven't sent me something that is formulaic. So I get so many emails that it's just so obvious that, you change the 2-line or they change, like nothing has changed, nothing's been filtered. Or I get an 80-page portfolio and all I want to see are the residential projects because I'm hiring for a residential firm. And so I want to see a 10-page portfolio that's beautiful residences. So I would say, like, this is a general comment. I used to teach at CCA and I used to run the internship program, and all the time I was like, just please make it personal, especially your email introduction, where if you're sending things in not by a site where you're going to get filtered by some bot, but instead where you're actually sending an email to some hiring person. It's so important to make it personal and say, look, I looked at your website, I saw what you're doing, and this is why it's important to me. Like, I've been dying to work on lead projects and I see you have 5 of them, or I have the experience to maybe do Greenpoint rating or whatever else that might feed into that experience of lead professionals. So I would just say, generally, it's just really important to be very specific and laser focused, as opposed to like shopping at 30 stores and getting, and only getting a response from 2.
Yeah, because you're fundamentally asking or answering the question, why me? How would I fit with your values, your work, your marketplace, and your clients? Why me? Why would you want to look at me? And that's a very personal thing. And I love what Hannah said. I read the front page letter more than anything because I expect the resume to be a little more formulaic. And then a couple pieces of work or a link to a website if our technology is working well, so that we can like look at your portfolio or have a 5-minute chat, just something that allows you to get your foot in the door. And then I've seen more and more people really effectively, they want to see the company, but they'll go to LinkedIn and find out who they know that knows somebody, and then they get hopped in that way, and we can track that. That always impresses me. You've got the work ethic to go out there and figure out who you know that knows somebody at our firm. That's a great way in. It always has been. So knowing the friend of a friend of a friend is still easier than a stranger. I also love when people, show or a project or a senior thesis or something like that, that is very much relatable to the type of work we do. And on the pragmatic side, go get Revit certified. It's not that hard, because I swear everybody will love you till the end of time. You don't want to get stuck in Revit, but you do need to know how to use it. I loved what Hannah said about LEED AP. Well buildings are going to leave LEED in the dust eventually. EDAC, there are a lot of certifications you can get. So it's not just your licensing, but if you show you're getting those certifications that are way easier to get, it shows that you've got the commitment that eventually you'd probably be able to get licensed. And I've also worked for some really big firms that, frankly, if you were a great designer, they didn't care if you were licensed. Did I say that out loud? Yes, I did, because the people were that talented. So picking up those certifications that show, you're going to study, work hard. Companies love collecting that for the purposes of marketing. So things like that. And the Revit certification shows that you actually know how to put together a good set of construction documents. And that is always going to be very important. If you could throw Navis in there, it would be even better. I'm just saying, we still do care about who can use the tools with lightning speed and effectivity.
That's very interesting, Lori. And I want to emphasize the power of LinkedIn. I myself got a job through LinkedIn, just like not even the person that I knew. There was just some person that was in my connection, and I have no idea how we got connected, but that's how I'm in San Francisco. So yeah, LinkedIn, please. And now I know I want to go to the next question, which is Jonathan's favorite, the pandemic impact for the visa and in general, international professional program.
Well, so that's kind of what I was getting at before. Like when I said the last 5.5 years have been really challenging, I mean, we went from Trump into the pandemic, and it created a stifling of immigration, not because of rhetoric policy, but because of perceived health and safety policy. And the United States took a very odd approach to the pandemic, different from other countries. We did not go with a testing mechanism, which a lot of other nations did. We had this patchwork of excluding wide swaths of countries from entering the United States. And essentially they set up this rule that said, if you have been in X country, and this included all of the EU, Schengen area, the UK, India, Russia, South Africa, and China, which is a huge amount of the global population. If you had been in any of those places in the last 14 days and you were not a green card holder or a citizen or a few other exemptions, you couldn't enter the United States. And Miriam, you had to get something called a national interest exception to enter the US. Now, what's interesting about it, under Trump, the NIE, as it's referred to, was way easier than under Biden, because Trump had a clause that said, if you were engaging in something that was of economic significance to the United States, you could get the waiver. Biden changed it to make it so that you had to be doing something within the supply chain, health and safety, transportation, food transportation, those kinds of things. And then obviously you had your humanitarian exemptions. This mechanism created havoc across the entire globe. I mean, it was insane, because now the embassies and consulates, which were on a hiring freeze from the economic downturn of the pandemic in 2020, were on reduced staff. had to allocate resources to adjudicate the NIEs. And it got so bad at one point. In Paris alone, they were getting 1,600 requests a week, and they were only able to process 200. So the time it took to get the national interest exception was months. It became like 3-4 months, by the end of it. Forget about China. They weren't even looking at them. They were just saying, no, sorry, we don't do this. And what that did, besides stifling international travel, is it pulled resources away from people's ability to adjudicate the visas themselves. And some of these backlogs became ridiculous, Mariam. Like a couple months ago, if you went and tried to get a visa appointment in London, the earliest you could get was May 2022. I mean, we're talking like 8-9 months. Now that is stifling to the economic impact. And you would think you could like apply and get an emergency request. They were getting more emergency requests than visa slots available. So all of a sudden you just had this like tremendous backlog of people trying to come into the United States with no way to do it. I mean, Cancun became like a waylay station for every foreign national trying to come into the United States as a visitor, because that's where they were waiting out this 2-week quarantine. Now, as of November 8th, so next week or a week and a half from now, the NIE is gone. It's gone. You have to be vaccinated. If you have an approved vaccination, you can enter the United States plus a negative COVID test within the last 72 hours. And this is being hailed as like, oh my God, thank you, a different policy. Interestingly enough, I'm getting tons of calls from people who are not vaccinated, who are wondering if they can now get an exception to enter the United States. And there are a few exceptions, specifically if you're from a country that has a very low access to the vaccine, they'll make an exception and will provide you a vaccine upon arrival. Children, obviously, you can get a letter from a doctor if you're already autoimmune comprised and the vaccine is, meant to harm you, stuff like that. But the problem has not gone away. Now, what we are seeing is like resources returning to the embassies and consulates. So like Monday, London made an announcement, we're opening up a whole bunch of slots in December. I mean, they were gone within a few hours, but you can see that they're starting to return to staffing. As I mentioned earlier, the fiscal year clicked over on October 1st. They're now allowed to hire again and restaff up. So it's starting to point in the right direction. But the bad news is that, unfortunately, the predictions are that the backlog of visas will not be eliminated until the end of 2022. So we're going to be riding this for quite some time, unfortunately. What does that mean to people? Well, listen, the reality is if you got to leave the country, you want to go home for Christmas, and you need a new visa, if you haven't booked it, you're probably not going. I mean, I'm just being realistic with you. Fascinatingly, though, they have correspondingly increased the exemption categories for people that are allowed to apply via mail. It used to be very, very limited circumstances where you could mail in your passport and get it stamped because they wanted to see you, they wanted to fingerprint you, they wanted to make sure you haven't changed persona or identity or engaged in international espionage since the last time you appeared for your visa. So they've expanded the mail-in program, but it's a little bit tricky as to applicability. You have to apply at the same location where you obtained the last visa. It has to be the same visa classification. So if you're here as a student, you have an H-1B, now you're going to be applying for a different visa classification because you had an F1 before. They make you come in person. So, trending better, but really, really, really problematic. And I think that this is where international companies, and Lori has a lot of experience dealing with this, and Hannah, you might be getting some requests from people that want to transfer people from like an overseas office to the United States. You can't make those decisions on a dime, unfortunately. You really, really, really have to plan far enough out in advance. Now, what's interesting, and this is something to really keep an eye on, but O1, which is that category for extraordinary ability, and I should have mentioned this earlier in talking about trends, but O1 has become a great category for architects. The approvability of O1 architects has increased tremendously. And the reason why I mention that is because O1s can get expedited visa appointments more easily than standard working visa classifications. So if you're able to secure an O1 visa for yourself, there's tons of advantages to being in that extraordinary ability bucket. But one of the corollary advantages is the ability to get an expedite. Because if you are extraordinary, it sort of puts you on a tier above and facilitates the embassies and consulates wanting to be of assistance. Be very, very, very open to going to other places as well, because these opening of embassies and consulates are changing constantly. If you're going to Europe, for example, like you might be able to get something in Madrid where Paris is showing no appointments until June 2022. You know, so shop around a little bit. There's if you just type visa wait times into Google, it takes you to this Department of State site, and you can actually see the reported wait times associated with each embassy and consulate. So there are ways to sort of fit together the puzzle. It's not quite as complicated as like, you know, where to place that load-bearing I-beam, but it's kind of up there for immigration law. So.
Jonathan, that was very interesting, and we're getting close to the Q&A time. But before I start asking the question that we received, I want to clarify something about the mail-in. Did you say, like, for example, if somebody got an E3 visa in Sydney, now they are in the US trying to renew, they can mail in their application back in Sydney?
You have to be physically present in the country
to mail it.
To mail in. That's a good question. I get asked that question a lot. They're like, "Whoa, can I send it to my mom and she'll mail it in for me?" And the answer is no, unfortunately.
Jonathan, is it possible to come in on an E3? I'm asking for a friend, and then have them mail it in, and then have them go to Canada, a Commonwealth country, from Australia, and come back through that way with a 2-3 day wait in Vancouver? Once upon a time, I know somebody who did that.
That would be slick, but it's actually fraud, and it can cause you a lot of problems down the road. So you can't like mail your passport, pretend you're overseas, get it back in the US, pop in and pop out to Canada.
Oh no, there was no lying involved. It's just the slot they had. They could come through Vancouver a little more easily because it was a Commonwealth.
Yeah, you can do that, sure.
Okay.
I think if I follow you correctly, but what you can't do is have somebody else mail in your passport for you. Yeah, don't do that.
Went from Australia to Canada, person went to Canada, came back down.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's totally cool. And Canada is slowly opening up. But, you know, the funny thing is with Canada, which has been like a haven for third country national processing, Toronto is only seeing people on Tuesday afternoons. Ottawa is Thursday mornings. So it is still really, really, really backed up.
Any reason for that?
It's honestly, the staffing levels are really bad. Like, if you want, I'll give you the nickel tour. But foreign service agents quit in droves under Trump. Like, it was a mass exodus. And then when the pandemic happened, you know, certain countries were very, very restrictive. Like Canada had much more restrictive guidelines than the United States did. Australia was like on this like lockdown forever. The embassies and consulates get locked down, and they have rules about how often the staff could be in. And then the pandemic caused a lot of people to quit because they didn't want to be facing the public all day and exposing themselves to the virus. I don't blame them.
Sure.
And then you had a hiring freeze and they weren't allowed to restaff up. So it just became like this snowball effect. I call it visa whack-a-mole, honestly. It is
I want to make sure,
like,
Jonathan,
honestly, like you see one place pop up and you try to hit it, and sometimes you hit it, other times the mole goes back into the hole, and you wait for the next one to pop up, and it's like boom, 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 boom. I literally have one guy in my office whose sole job right now is every morning to come in and see where we can process visas for that day. That's his job. Like, I've never had that at my firm before. He's the visa shopper. He's the secret shopper for visas. But it's like, it is really that crazy right now.
Sure. Let's now get some of the questions that the attendees are asking. I think we only have 12, 13 minutes for Q&A left. somebody just typed in, I think they just re-emphasizing the question that I asked. They saying that people coming here with 5, 6 years of experience, but unfortunately they have to start from the entry level again. And I personally, I mean, not entry level, but I felt that drop when I first arrived. It's easy to pick it up after a year, but that first year, believe me, it just felt like, why am I in this shoe right now? So they just asking for like, is there any suggestion to go around this and just like have a smooth transition? Why do we have to go down and come back up?
I would say the answer is money. If you're unknown, people want to start you at the bottom because when you do the wage analysis, which has changed over the years, keeping you down low, unfortunately, is a little bit easier. I'm not saying I've done that or the firms I've worked for have done that, but I know that is an attitude out there.
Hopefully, perhaps both Lori, Hannah, and all other human resources, they can just consider that and have some empathy for these people with all those background experiences that coming in to make a career here, perhaps.
Right, just your years on the planet are incredibly valuable. And working with people and communications and all the soft skill kinds of things are incredibly valuable. But you have to find an employer who values them. So
the next question I've received here is I think, Jonathan, this is for you. Is it possible for work visa holder to also work as entrepreneurs, either establishing a business in the US or a virtual business in their own country?
So this is part of the problem with the current immigration laws. They were written in 1986 primarily and updated in 1996. And like concepts of remote work and virtual work, like they just don't exist. There's some like little places where we've seen some policy changes, but technically you're not meant to work for anybody outside the United States if you're in the United States with a visa tied to a single employer. There are ways to set up your own business. Certain nationalities have advantages over others when it comes to that. For example, like your Western countries have access to a visa called E2, which is specifically established for people that invest and start their own enterprise. There was a program under the Biden administration where under the Obama administration called Entrepreneur in Residence, where if you had some venture capital money behind you and owned a percentage of a business, you could actually get a visa to run it regardless of nationality. Trump canceled that, surprisingly. But recently it was reenacted by Biden. So there is a new mechanism available for entrepreneurs. You can own an interest in a company, however, regardless of if you have a visa to work for it, you just can't necessarily perform services for that entity. So you can be an investor in another business, just like you can own stock. You know, there's nothing stopping you from buying Microsoft or Apple or Google or anything like that. You can buy stock or ownership equity in an enterprise. They're not prohibited from doing it. There are ways to get permission to work for multiple employers. So if you have an H-1B, you can actually get something called concurrent H-1B employment, where you can have 2 employers sponsor you. The problem is if it's your own enterprise, you can't self-sponsor on an H-1B. Because the H-1B has to have a valid employer-employee relationship. So that can be a little tricky. However, and this is bringing it all the way around, you can do an O1. And when I was saying like there's advantages to O1s and architects and O1s are really singing right now, that also goes for owning a company. You can be owner-occupied in O1 classification. And you can also have concurrent O1 classification. So you can be an O1 for an employer, and if they allow you to work for yourself on the side, you can do that if you get an O1 for your own business. You can do that simultaneously. What you cannot do, Miriam, is have an H-1B with one employer and then get an O1 for yourself. You can't have 2 different visa classifications. That's a rub. So short answer, sometimes you can do it. You know, but it's something that if that's really what you're passionate about, we love working with entrepreneurs and trying to come up with a creative solution to help you achieve your dreams. I mean, that's really what it's all about. Coming to the
I think
United States.
especially with architects, Jonathan, is very like usual that like you work for a firm or for a company, and then a friend of a friend, a family member, somebody has a side job, and you have all these side jobs at home. So when you become an overseas architect, you suddenly feel like, oh, it's just my company and me and nobody else. My world is
But
now
I think this
limited.
kind of goes to what Lori and Hannah are saying. Like there's a reluctance or a perception of reluctance on the behalf of employers to push through to permanent residency. They feel like they're giving somebody a ticket to go and do whatever they want. In reality, is it creates loyalty, in my opinion.
Yep.
And I think what it does is allow that person to have that stability in their mind, and also gives them the freedom to engage in other activities if they want to on the side. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So I've seen it a million times over where people are so appreciative of that sponsorship for permanent residency that they'll do 20, 30 years with a company. So it's almost like counterintuitive in some ways, but the dividends are incredible for employers.
Sure. There is one question here. Someone is asking that I'm Australian citizen and have got the approved petition for E3. Is it okay for me for my visa stamp to go to Vancouver's consulate, or do I have to go back to Sydney?
You can go to Vancouver if you can get an appointment.
I thought so, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, Canada by charter will always take a third country national for visa processing. Other places will not.
And
Like for Australian,
my
sorry?
story is 4 years old. So, I mean, it's before Trump. So my story, it worked very effectively. It might not work now.
Yeah, no, but you can go to Vancouver to process your visa, 100%. They'll even do new E3s in Vancouver. But Bahamas will only do extensions. Bermuda will do new E3s. Bermuda has like a righteous Australian hangout there in non-COVID times. Like right now, you can't get an appointment, but they have hotels that cater specifically to Australia for visa renewals.
Jonathan, I think this question is very important and interesting. Someone is asking for H-1B visa holders, would the salary reduction caused by COVID impact their immigration status? What are the consequences of changing employers or green card reapplication caused by change of employment?
So that's a very good question. Actually, it's not such an issue for the employee, it's an issue for the employer. The employer is making an attestation that they're going to pay a certain wage. If you pay below that wage, the employee has a right to file a complaint with the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Department for their back wages. And the DOL will actually open an investigation into that employer. So like for the companies that I represent at the beginning of the pandemic, when there was salary reductions, but the wage was still above prevailing wage, we were filing amended petitions to reflect the new wage to avoid this exact situation. But employees get really worried about it. They just have to show that they were rightfully employed. It's not their fault if the employer is not adhering to the terms of the H-1B visa regulations. So yeah, it could cause you some problems, it could cause some questions, but ultimately it should not preclude you from an H-1B exception or pursuing permanent residency.
Yeah, just overall sensitivity during the pandemic, which, you know, hit certain marketplaces harder than others. I actually met with every single person that had a visa status, to make sure they were okay, because you have to be very careful if you're thinking about layoffs or other things, how you handle that and handle wages. We also had people ask for leaves of absence, and Jonathan, help me here. That suspends the time on your visa. Is that correct?
Well, it doesn't suspend your time on your visa, but it suspends the employer's obligation to pay.
Right.
If you depart the United States under your leave of absence, you're able to recapture any of that time back into H-1B status.
Yep.
But like, let's say you want to take like a sabbatical to go hike Zion National Park or the Pacific Crest Trail for 6 months or something like that, like you can still maintain your H-1B. The employer doesn't have to pay you because it's a voluntary leave.
Yep.
But it doesn't allow you to recapture that time because you're physically present in the United States in that classification. If you depart, let's say you went home to Australia or you went back to Canada, then any time outside the United States can be recaptured.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, it's a good question. It's a really good question.
There is another good one, I think. Someone is asking, how long can I practice overseas without getting a work visa? I think this is for the students, right? Can anybody work here
Well,
without a
you
working
don't,
visa?
this is a funny thing, but US immigration law does not apply if you're not physically present in the United States.
Yep.
And we saw this a lot during the pandemic. Like people would be like, I'm going home to Mexico because I'd rather sit there than in my studio apartment in San Francisco. Hey, nothing wrong with it if the employer's okay with it. It's more of an issue of tax.
Yeah.
It's a
Yes.
huge issue of tax. You got to be very careful because really, if you're doing that, you should take yourself off payroll and become a 1099 employee so you don't have an employer paying payroll tax for somebody who's not in the United States. And not all countries have reciprocal tax agreements. It can be a very big problem for security, which is one of the, I don't know if it's as sensitive with architecture, but for my work, like I had an employee who's Iranian. She wanted to go home to Iran and work remotely. And I'm like, hell no. I mean, I like you,
And-
but you're not working from Iran because your network's not secure. Miriam, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, it's.
And California is a special animal. Do not go down the independent contractor lane if you don't know what you're doing, because it is much more restrictive now, being a 1099. And California also loves their taxes. And although they suspended a lot of the obligations, there's a 180-day rule. You need to talk to somebody that understands tax. It's
Yeah,
probably Hannah, but you need to be really careful. We had people move out of state. We actually opened up operations in those states to keep it all copacetic, but it was a lot of work.
Yeah, so, and a lot of times we actually advise people, if you're leaving the United States completely, to set up your own corporate entity in that country so you can
Nice.
bill through a corporation as opposed to an individual. So
Thank you.
it's challenging. So yeah, like when you work from abroad, it's not the visa that's the issue.
The taxing people are way worse. Well, no, the visa people are worse. I'm not sure. On any given day, it's tax or visa
Well, you're
people.
talking about the largest and the second largest bureaucracies in the world, actually.
Okay, well,
So,
yeah. I have
Okay,
felt
we-
pain from each.
We only have 3 minutes left, and I
But
have
we can keep
tons of.
going forever. This is awesome
I
stuff.
know, but unfortunately, we have to close out. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. I would like to thank the speakers. And as Jonathan said earlier, he's happy to provide 15 minutes consultation. If you need this event been recorded, we would upload it on our website. We will share it with you, attendees, with the contact details of the speakers if they need to reach out to them directly. Now, I want to ask Peter Miller, the chair of the committee, to close out the event, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks to our distinguished panelists. Also, special thanks to our moderator and event champion, Marianne Miri, and event co-champion, Elizabeth Sporer from SOARCH, to our chapter staff, the International Practice Committee members, and my co-chairperson, Sean Yang, and of course, our registered attendees. Thank you for attending and asking questions. This is a part of our International Professionals Program, and we hope to have more. I think there are a lot of things to talk about in both directions. And so I also want to thank our 2021 Practice Committee sponsors for International Practice Committee, NIBI Construction, and also our 2021 chapter sustaining sponsors, which are too many to read to you in the short time we have, but include, well, I won't read any of them. So we want you to consider joining the committee. So follow us on social media at AIASFIPC on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can see what we're up to. And thank you for attending. And again, thank you, Miriam, for pulling this together.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.